Today we're going to be talking about Tpcastt, which is poetry reading strategy. You're going to use this in most of your classes at Notre Dame, so you might have even used it already. Today we're just going to review what each of the letters in Tpcastt stands for and what we should do when we get to the bottom of the list. What does this mean? How does it help us better understand poetry? So the first T is for title. We're going to start by looking at the title of the poem. Now, if you have a poem that's titled like Poem 304, don't worry about it. You can skip the title step. This is only when the poem has a meaning, a title with real meaning. For example, what would we write? In the first box, we have, I don't know if you can see this on the video, but there's a Tpcastt graphic organizer that gives you a space to write for each of these. So in that first box for title, we would write whatever that word or words make us think about, just on a very literal level. So if the poem is titled Hands, we might write that hands could mean literally our hands. It could be like a helping hand or a hired hand. There could be lots of different meanings for the word hand, like give me a hand, lots of different things it could mean. And we would just sort of explore that, think about that. The next step, and it's not in this list, but it is on your handout, we want to read the poem and we want to read it out loud, and we want to read it out loud twice. Now sometimes that's a little uncomfortable, especially if we're in a quiet classroom, but it really does help us understand poetry, because poetry is more auditory than a lot of the other reading we've done. It's meant to be musical. So there's some things that we just can't get from the poem without hearing it. And reading that poem out loud with our voices is really a way to better understand the poem. It might help you to pick a partner and read it to each other, taking turns. It's a little less awkward that way. Next, we are going to paraphrase. So we are going to take each line of the poem and put it in our own words. So there's a box for that here, but what would be better is taking a copy of the poem itself and writing next to each line. Because if we just try to summarize the whole poem at once, we're going to get it wrong. We want to instead go slowly, line by line, and try to say, what does this line mean? And what we're going to come up against is words we don't know. And so we should look up those words so that we can really understand what each line is very literally saying. We're not going to be able to understand the deeper meaning until we understand the meaning. And because poems often use unusual syntax, unusual words, unusual spacing, things like that, it can be hard to get the meaning right away. We need to work on it, and that's why we paraphrase. So next, we're going to start looking at some of the things that give poems their deeper meaning, and we get to connotations. So a connotation is a meaning that's beyond the definition of a word, a meaning that is more emotional, that comes from maybe social or cultural context. For example, a visitor and a guest, that basically means the same thing in terms of a definition. But a visitor, that's sort of a neutral term. It could be someone you want there, someone you don't want there, someone you invited, someone you who just showed up. We don't know. But a guest implies that they're welcome. Being a guest implies that they're special in some way, that you invited them. The word intruder probably has a slightly different dictionary definition, but it certainly has some negative connotations about somebody who's unwanted, who doesn't belong. All three words are about somebody from the outside coming in to our space, but each one has a different connotation. So for number 4, connotation, we're going to be looking for words in our poem that have an emotional meaning or a social meaning that's deeper or different from just what it literally means in the dictionary. Next, we're going to look at the attitude. Attitude or tone is the way the author of the poem or the speaker of the poem feels towards the subject. So we want to think about Is the author or the speaker mocking the subject? Is it very sincere? Is it joking? Is it angry? Is it loving? And you might also benefit from writing down why you think so. What are the words in the poem that give you the impression of the attitude? Next, we're going to study the shifts. Any place in the poem where something changes dramatically. Maybe it's the attitude that changes. Maybe it's the rhyme scheme that changes. Maybe it's the way the poem sounds, the words the poem's using. Literally anything in the poem that changes in a sort of sudden way counts as a shift. You want to write down where the shift happens, and you want to write down the impact it has. Now, not every poem is going to have a shift, so sometimes this won't apply, but it happens often enough that it's in our Tpcastt tool, so we really want to look for them. Number 7 is the title again. Now that we've read and better understood the poem, we want to go back to the title and think about why the poem is titled that, why that particular word or words were given special significance in the meaning of the title, and we're going to add a little bit more to our understanding by looking again at the title, maybe thinking symbolically. And then finally, we're going to attempt to write a theme for our poem, thinking about how the poem is sending us a message about the way life is or the way life should be. So that's the basic of Tpcastt. But when you get to that, you're not quite done. We really want to take some time to look at our poem and think about all the figurative language that's being used in the poem to convey this theme, okay? So I've added 2 more columns to your graphic organizer for sound devices and comparisons, 2 of our major categories of poetic and literary devices. So sound devices, things like alliteration, assonance, onomatopoeia, rhyme, rhythm. How does the sound of the poem, the actual way you hear it, how does that contribute to its meaning? Think about things that you might not even have a word or a term for, like really harsh sounds like K's, T's, and F's can make a poem sound angry, whereas soothing sounds like S's, M's can make it sound soothing or romantic or quiet. The rhythm of a poem, what's called meter, can make the poem sound a lot different. So think about like a Dr. Seuss poem or book. It's got a really bouncy rhythm to it that makes it seem, fun, maybe childlike. Something else might maybe sound like a march, very steady, remind you of maybe something military, or it might give you the impression of water or tides. You want to think about how the sounds of the poem add to its meaning or help emphasize the meaning that you already explored. You also want to think about comparisons, things like metaphor, simile, allusion, symbolism, and personification. Any of those techniques are really comparing things. That's what we're doing when we make a metaphor. We're comparing something unknown, like love, to something known, like a roller coaster. So if I say love is a roller coaster, what do I mean? That there are ups and downs, that it's really fast, that it's exciting, but a little bit scary. So how do those comparisons add to the meaning of my poem? Eventually what you do is when you're writing about the poem and trying to explore its meaning, you would start by saying, this is what the poem means. And then you would use those sound devices and the comparisons and all the little details you noticed to prove, to support your meaning. That's your textual evidence when it comes to a poem. I will post an example for you. The example I have on Classroom is a poem called Ozymandias. Both the poem is there and also an example of my Tpcastt worksheet for Ozymandias if you'd like to see an example. And I will see if I can find a video for you as well. If you have any questions, please let me know.